My fellow Nigerians, as your future president, I want to share my thoughts today on Bola Tinubu's October 23, 2024 cabinet reshuffle. First, I must commend Tinubu for at least firing some of his ministers a little over a year after they were sworn in, apparently because by his assessment, they had failed to deliver. It's also a commendable move in the Nigerian context because unlike former President Muhammadu Buhari, who didn't carry out any significant cabinet reshuffles during either of his two terms, he only did so at the start of his second term. It at least shows Tinubu's willingness to remind his ministers that they need to deliver. In fact, former President Goodluck Jonathan also didn't carry out any major cabinet reshuffle after being elected in May 2011 until more than 2 years later in September 2013. So yes, in that sense, Tinubu has done well. Hopefully, this will encourage the retained ministers and the newly appointed ministers to work harder in their service to us, the Nigerian people. Another thing Tinubu has done well in this cabinet reshuffle is to announce the ministries he was assigning the new ministers to before their Senate screening. Indeed, this is apparently the very first time in modern Nigerian history, at least since the return to civilian rule in 1999, that any president has sent a list of ministerial nominees to the Senate along with their specific portfolios. This matters because it enriches the screening process in the Senate, since senators' questions can be, one, very specific, and two, the answers to those questions can help the senators better assess the nominee's ability to serve in the designated ministry. Yes, the screening exercise isn't as rigorous and serious as Nigerians would hope, but at least this is a step in the right direction. A future National Assembly should codify this principle into law so that future presidents like me will be required by law to state the specific ministries that ministerial nominees will be in charge of. This is simply common sense and global best practice stuff. Sadly, that's where the positives end. The very first big disappointment with the reshuffle is that it does absolutely nothing to reduce the size of the cabinet of 48 ministers. When Javier Milei took office in Argentina in December 2023, his country, a developing country like Nigeria, faced one of its worst economic downturns in decades. To turn things around, Milei promised to reduce waste by cutting down the size of government, and he did. He reduced the number of ministries by 47% from 19 to 10. In Nigeria, the very weak argument against such a drastic reduction in the size of the cabinet is that every state should have at least one minister. Well, that law is backward and should absolutely be amended. Apart from ministries, the federal government also has departments, agencies, and even companies like the NNPC, in which it is the majority shareholder. It will make more sense to have a law that says every state should have at least one appointee in the upper echelons of the federal bureaucracy, which of course includes MDAs and companies, ministries, departments, agencies, and companies. If or when we do that, there will be no need whatsoever for a large cabinet that not only wastes resources on minister salaries, official vehicles, security and support staff, office space, office equipment, you name it, but also wastes time in cabinet meetings. That is because it is typically in cabinet meetings that ministers present memos for approval. And with so many ministers trying to present memos to show that they are working, the amount of time spent assessing the memos and discussing appropriate courses of action is ultimately reduced. That automatically results in less efficiency, both in policy formulation and implementation. Tinubu is actually very well aware of this issue. In fact, that's why, to appear to be doing something about it along with the reshuffle, he announced he was restricting ministers of state and agency heads to a maximum of 3 vehicles in their official convoy. This is a typical example of cosmetic exercise. If Tinubu was actually serious about reducing federal government waste, he will start by reducing the number of ministries, period. What, for example, is the point of a Ministry of Livestock Development when we have a Ministry of Agriculture? Livestock Development should be a department under that ministry. Similarly, why can't the Ministry of Steel Development simply be a department under the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. The same goes for the Ministries of Marine and Blue Economy and Innovation and Digital Economy, which should ideally be ministerial departments. Also, the Ministries of Women's Affairs, Youth Development, and Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Reduction should be departments in the Ministry of Social Affairs. By the same token, the Ministry of Water Resources should be merged with the Ministry of Power. I can go on and on. These are just 5 examples of how we can reduce costs by cutting down the size of the government. But hey, it's now been 12 years since the Oronsaye report recommended such efforts to President Goodluck Jonathan, and yet 2 presidents later, nothing has changed. It's all about the lack of political will to do the right thing, and it's a shame. Another argument made by large cabinet advocates like Adebayo Shitu, who served as communications minister in President Buhari's first term, is that some ministries, such as agriculture and education, oversee numerous agencies, sometimes more than 4 dozen, and that it can thus be unwieldy or difficult to supervise or effectively manage all their agencies and departments. The question that then arises is, why have many agencies in the first place? In fact, one specific recommendation of the Oronsaye report was the scrapping or merging of some agencies due to their overlapping functions. The current political class love the idea of many ministries simply because it gives them and their cronies more job opportunities. Jobs for the boys, as we often say. And of course, as earlier mentioned, all ministries have their respective budget heads and recurrent expenditure. That's all they are interested in, and it's a big, big shame. But I'm confident that there'll come a day when we'll end this waste in Nigeria. Let's go back to Bola Tinubu. He also did nothing to make what I call the Minister of State problem go away. Granted, the Minister of State problem didn't start with Tinubu, but it is a constitutional problem. In sections 147 and 148 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, we see the appointments and responsibilities of ministers only. There's nothing whatsoever about ministers of state. Indeed, at a valedictory session in May 2023, just before they left office, the current aviation minister, Festus Keyamo, a lawyer and senior advocate of Nigeria, who served as Minister of State for Labor in Buhari's second term, cited those 2 sections to show that Minister of State appointments are unconstitutional. Beyond that, since ministers of state are effectively junior ministers, it's difficult to assess their performances because their proposals can only be presented in the cabinet after they've been approved by ministers. Keyamo also said many ministers of state, past and present, haven't complained about this problem for fear of being accused of ingratitude to the president who appointed them. Finally, by appointing Jumoke Oduwole to be the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Tinubu has now appointed the 4th minister from Ogun State. Wale Dun, the Minister of Finance, Bosun Tijani, the Minister of Innovation and Digital Economy, and Dekunle Salako, the Minister of State for Environment, are the other 3. Not only is it very uncommon to have more than 2 ministers from one state, but this just reinforces the clear ethnic bias in Bola Tinubu's appointments. He appointed Olayemi Kadoso as Central Bank of Nigeria Governor, Kayode Egbetokun as Inspector General of Police, Adewale Adeniyi as Controller General of Customs, Kemi Nandab as Controller General of the Immigration, Zacchaeus Adedeji as Chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service, our tax agency, and Olanipekun Olukoyode as EFCC Chairman. We are a diverse country, for God's sake. So it's very important that federal appointments should reflect the diversity. This isn't about competence. There are competent people all over Nigeria. Ogun State shouldn't have 4 ministers while 27 states have 1 each. This absolutely doesn't bode well for national unity. Fellow Nigerians, there you have it. Those are my thoughts on Bola Tinubu's October 23, 2024 cabinet reshuffle. In my January 2025 State of the Nation address at the end of January, I will include an assessment of the cabinet based on ministers' performances during this intervening period. Thanks for your kind attention. May God bless you and your family, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.